Yay, there we are.
Yay.
Hey.
Guys.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Virgin Author Show. We are three friends bonded by our love of writing, struggling to navigate the publishing world and offering tips to all of our new friend writers. I am Mandy McGuire.
And hi, everybody. I'm Jana Vandelar.
Hi, I'm Lissa Reese, and I'm so pleased to introduce tonight's guest. Julie Barton is the author of the wonderful New York Times bestselling memoir, Dog Medicine, How My Dog Saved Me from Myself. She has a
Show the
BA
cover
from...
longer before I have to interrupt. Show me that picture again.
Oh, look at
I don't have that cover. It's the
Look
cutest
how
I
thing.
know.
Oh, God.
Okay, sorry to
Okay.
interrupt.
Okay, go ahead.
Julie has a BA from Kenyon College, an M.F.A. in writing from Vermont College of Fine Arts, and an M.A. in women's study from Southern Connecticut State. She's widely published. Her credits include Brainchild Magazine, Louisiana Literature, Two Hawks Quarterly, and the Huffington Post, among others. She's also been nominated for a Pushcart Prize. Currently, Julie lives in Northern California with her husband, Greg, two children, and a small menagerie of pets. I first met Julie last year at a writing conference where I took her classes on writing memoir and the art of revision, and we invited her on the show to talk about how to craft a memoir. But first, we want to talk about her runaway bestseller, Dog Medicine. Thank you, Julie, for being here tonight.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I feel like we're just like a bunch of friends just sitting around.
Yeah,
Let's talk
Love
writing.
that.
for that. Yeah, we get that a lot. I'm glad you feel like it. Well, we're so excited to meet you. Well, me, I guess Lissa's already met you.
Well, let's jump right in. So, can you tell our listeners what is your book about?
Yeah. So it basically spans 1 year, like the action of the book does, but there's a lot of flashbacks. And then there's a little jumping it forward at the end, but it's the year after I graduated from college, and I grew up and went to college in Ohio. And then I moved to New York City because I thought that's what all writers do. You have to be there. And it's about my slow descent into a very crippling depression. And I went home from New York and nothing was helping, and I was really, really suffering. And the only hopeful thought I had was that maybe I could adopt a puppy, and that would give me something else to focus on. So in addition to therapy and medication and all those other kinds of interventions, this dog absolutely saved my life, and he is and forever will be. He's my spirit twin. I know that. I know there are multiple lifetimes we've been with each other in them, and I also thought I am absolutely crazy for thinking this because, who does that? And it's more mainstream now, but in 96 when I got him, this, people were like, it's just a dog. And I was like, oh, no, but I didn't really share that with people because I just was scared of judgment. And so after he passed away, actually the day after he died, so I had left my career in high tech, and I decided I wanted to try to write seriously. So I got an M.F.A. and I did the things, and then I tried to write a novel and it wasn't any good. And I mean, it was fine. It was a starter book. But then I had my babies and I was like, I still am a writer, aren't I? I'm a writer. And the day after he died, I got an email first thing in the morning from this literary journal, and they said that I was a finalist in their fiction contest, and I had forgotten that I'd entered it. And I was like, oh. And then I had a moment in this room, and I heard him say, tell our story. And I have chills because I really felt like that's the only thing. I've never dreamt about him. But I just heard him say, tell our story. And I just said, I'll try. And that was in 2007. And the book was published in 2016.
Wow.
Thank you for sharing.
really special, sweetie. How long did it take you to actually write it? Because I know publishing is good.
Yeah, probably about 5 years of part-time writing, because I was actually 7 months pregnant when he died with my second baby. So I had a lot on my plate for those
A little
first few years. But I always knew, and I knew my MFA is in fiction, and I never thought of myself as a memoir writer, as a nonfiction writer at all. And then I just sort of had this slow, dreadful realization, like, oh my God, it has to be a memoir, because it's true, it has to be a memoir. And so,
but you write it, and I don't mean to interrupt, but you write it like it's like a novel. I mean, it just goes so fast. It's like a story. I mean, it's not like, oh, I don't know. It's not like a lot of memoirs I've read. It's like a fictional story. It's kind of hard to believe in some levels how
It's a memoir done well.
Yeah.
And even though it just takes place during that 1 year, you do give us a lot of background. And one of the things that really, you wrote about your childhood trauma and your struggles with this profound depression in like a no holds barred way. And for me, the beginning of the book felt really raw, and it was hard to read, Julie. And the thing is, those experiences are so important to the story. And it didn't take me long to realize that without understanding how deep your pain went and where it came from, I wouldn't have been able to rejoice in your connection to this soulful dog of yours. And your connection to him was so wonderful. And you do credit him with the miracle of your healing. And I know a lot of our listeners, and all three of us, have very loving pets. And will you talk a little bit about your bond with Bunker?
Yeah. There was a really profound moment, and it's in the book, but it's this moment we had. So I had spent about a month literally lying down or in my bed or face down on my parents' couch. And there was a moment. So then I decided I wanted to try to get better, and I wanted to get him, and I got him, and I came home. And for those first few days, I was like up at 6 a.m. outside with him. And I was like, this is great. And then I started to feel it again. It's not like it just was like this, right? And I started to feel like, oh, what am I doing? Like, I'm living at my parents. I'm 23. Or 22. I don't know what I'm doing with my life. Like, such a loser and all those things. And I had this moment where I was sitting on that couch, and I was just starting to feel really bad. And he was sort of, goofing off on the other side of the room. And he turned and stopped and saw me and walked over to me and just sat down at my feet and leaned against my shins and was like, hi. And I had this moment where I said to myself, did he just notice that change in my demeanor? And I had, all of the rational parts of me were like, no way. But the part of me that is the genuine, real soul of me was like, absolutely yes. And so I had a choice in that moment. Do I say that was just a fluke, or do I say he noticed and he's going to help me? And I just decided I was going to decide the hopeful thing. And he absolutely did it his whole life, not just to me. He did it with my friends, with, when he was probably 5 or 6 years old, I found a job, the only job I could find that would let me bring him. And I had a friend who was in the middle of a terrible divorce, and she'd just say, can I take Bunker with me for lunch? And she would just go sit with him for lunch. And she's like, he's really, really helping me. So, it was unlike any bond I've ever had, human or animal or spiritual or anything. And so, writing the book was a way to really honor it and celebrate it. And also, writing the book was a really good way to grieve, because I got to say what it was for me to have him. because I don't think people really understood unless they have had a similar kind of soul dog,
Yeah.
or cat, or I've had people come to my readings and say they had a spirit rat. So there are all kinds, and I believe it. I believe it. They come how they come. Horses but yeah, he was just my absolute everything. And I remember, it's actually funny now, like on TikTok and on Instagram, you'll see these videos of these people, like their dog is 3 years old and they're already crying because they know they're going to die someday. That was me. That was me. I was just like, oh God, I can't, and part of the book is him having some really difficult health issues and really struggling and
back.
potentially not making it. And that was really, really scary because I was still pretty fragile. And if he had died at, 1 year old, I don't know that what would have happened. So
yeah, I think that dogs can sense that even hang on longer. I have a 15-year-old right here underneath me that's like, my vet just asked me the other day, how long do you think she's gonna make? And I go, this girl
yeah.
keeps on trucking because I still need her. But I mean, you always do, but I do think they kind of have a sense. And I'm gonna just segue on to like writers, like in general. I think we can so relate to this, and generally because we are so alone a lot. So I think we tend to, a lot of us can go through a form of depression. And I think it's not necessarily every one of us, but I think our writing does help. And you had kind of said that it helps you kind of process. And I think it's just really beautiful that you wrote the book on that. But when your depression became life-threatening without you recognizing what happened, what was going on, I think that's really easy to slip into too, because you just don't even get it. What advice would you give to our listeners who might wonder what's happening to them or whether they might be depressed? I mean, do you have any warnings now that you've been going through so much of the studies and stuff? Or
Yeah, I mean, just from a mental health perspective.
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, when I was initially depressed, it wasn't the way it is now. It wasn't in the public lexicon.
I know. And even now there's still stigmas, which just bugs
There are still stigmas. Yeah. And that's just silly. But, back then I didn't know anybody who'd ever been diagnosed with anything because nobody would talk about it back then. And so when I was diagnosed, I was like, oh my God, like this is terrible. And this is it. But I think as far as your question, when you wake up in the morning and you think, no, I don't want this day, or, you can't, for me, it's often, finding that my thoughts are just looping negative stuff. And you don't notice, I think I've done decades of work on mindfulness, so I notice now, but I didn't notice when I was a teenager or a kid or in my 20s that I was just constantly beating myself up.
Yeah.
And concluding the worst possible thing from the slightest little moment, because that was sort of what I had experienced in some ways at home, was isolation and insults and abuse. And so I just sort of assumed like, well, I'm pretty worthless. And so I think now, and since I was initially diagnosed, I treat my depression the way that somebody who is type 1 diabetes would treat their diabetes, right? Like I think of it as a physical like ailment that I have that I just have to watch, and I have to be careful and have to do the things that I know sometimes I don't feel like doing, but they're going to help me feel better. And
I love that. That's really good. Yeah.
Yeah. It's I think how really anybody has to live, I mean, it can, even somebody who's not prone to depression can have a depressed era. you know?
Sure. There's
Yeah.
situational depression can,
Yeah.
I- we could talk about this for the rest of our time, but I really do want to get onto the craft of writing memoir. Mandy, did you have a question on craft?
I do. I wanted to hear about your writing process. Writing something really personal, like your memoir, is extra hard. And I'm working on a novel that has characters from my life, including my father, and going through like that character arc and trying to understand these people in your life is really, to me, I've said it's like self-counseling. So it's really hard to do. So um, what are the basics? Like, how long did it take you? I think you mentioned earlier. Are you a morning writer? Are you an evening writer? Were you alone? Were you crying? Like, I know it's really emotional. So just anything you're willing to share about that for other people who are writing something that's really, if it's memoir or fiction, whatever it is, something that's really personal and hard for them to delve into.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So the first part, am I a morning, night, whatever writer? I'm like whenever. Whenever I'm like, oh, I kind of feel like maybe I want to write a little. I'm like, hurry, you know. Sometimes it's late,
I'm the
sometimes
same
it's,
way.
you
I'm like,
know, it's
yeah.
and I you know, teaching and writing in my classes helps because that's a built-in time, but you know, it's sort of whenever it strikes. I wish I was somebody who was like, I sit down every day from 8 to da, 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 but I just don't. And I always mean to be. I was aim to. And as far as writing the really hard stuff, um, you know, I think that there's something really interesting about, for me, when I get into writing about the hard stuff, the talk of craft can actually be very helpful and distracting because
I love that. Yeah.
you know, you're thinking about how to best communicate this moment. I have cried. In fact, when this is done, I'll put in, is there a place to put in the comments a link? Because I have a YouTube video of one of my writing retreats, which is what I also did when my kids were little. I would leave and go to hotels for like a night or two and just write for like 18 straight hours. I'm a bit of a binge writer. And in one of those, I did cry as I wrote the epilogue of this book, and I filmed it because I'm a masochist. But yeah, you know, I think it depends on the person. I do not shy away from thinking about or writing about or talking about really difficult things. I never have been that kind of person. And to my detriment and to my gain, right? It can work both ways. So writing about it, in a lot of ways, writing about the really tough stuff for me felt like almost a validation. Like, this did happen. I'm putting it down, and these are the craft part comes in, where it's like focusing on the details, right? The details of like what, you know, the scent, what I heard, what I felt, what I saw, you know, the colors. Like, there's a scene where, you know, I'm being pushed against a bed, and my ear and I remember my ear ringing and my hair pulling on the wicker, and you know, those kinds of details both make it really tangible for the reader, but also for me, it was this way of like, yes, I remember that. And those aren't details that I have thought about for all those years. A lot of times I would sit down to write this particular scene, which is how I did it. I only did one scene at a time, which I think is
okay. So speaking of one scene, so memoir, as opposed to autobiography, where maybe you're telling the story of an entire life, memoir can focus on a specific aspect of your life. But as we've already talked about, you have to go back and give us the flashbacks, the background, so we understand what's happening now. And how do you decide which are the scenes that are going to make it into the book? And did you have a process for that? Did you stumble through it? Did you go through the whole thing and say, oh my God, I forgot to say XYZ?
Yeah. Yes, I did stumble a lot.
All of the above.
Yeah, it was not some linear thing at all. It was, I literally had a handwritten list of the memories that I felt had shaped me, the incidents in my life that had shaped me and led to this particular stage of my life. And I just would sit down each day and write those. And some of them I was, 10 years old, and some of them I was 18 years old, and some of them I was, 20 or 12. And then in writing, and then I had them all almost like, like a deck of cards or something, right? And I did that thing where I have all the scenes and I staple them and I print them out and I put them all over the table. And then I'm like, where does this go? How do I put this flashback in? And for me, the device became the fact that among many magical things that happened when I was writing this book, I realized that the day that I collapsed on the floor in Manhattan was the day that my dog was born.
That's what I was going to ask you, because I love that part.
Like,
so you figured that out later, right? Yeah.
Later, I had no idea.
I'm going to quote it really. I'm going to interrupt you because it said, listen how beautiful this is. It said, I asked permission ahead of time, but you tied in that correlation by writing, searched, Bunker, your puppy, searched desperately for his mother, for her nourishment, for her touch, her warmth and care, just like me. I'm like, that's such a synchronicity. I love it.
And that was sort of how I tied. So Lisa, you're saying the beginning of the book is really rough. And if I were just
I actually thought it was really rough. I don't mean to interrupt, but for me, and I suffer from depression too, but I think, and I don't mean to interrupt again, but I felt like it was so real that there wasn't an ounce of fakeness, or I felt like it was just the pot on the stove and the sizzle. Everything was really, wow, that happened. And it was just, you were there. So to me, I felt like I was brought into it, and I just fell in love with you right from there. It was just like, this is so well written again. But
thank you. Thank you. That's so beautiful. Yeah. But I think that in order to not give the reader this just like big dump of how hard things were, I had to bring in that there's a little glimmer of hope that was just born here. And so I would intersperse the chapters, both flashback chapters and current chapters, with the dog, right? That he was on the way. Do not fret. It will get better.
Joel, that's trying to find nourishment. It's so sweet.
Before we wrap this up, we had Amy Ferris on the show last month, and she said to be sure to ask you about the surprising way your book was published. And I think I'm the only one of us here who knows this story, but I would love if you'd share this with us now, because it's pretty spectacular.
Yeah.
And the way you handled it.
I'm leaning in.
So beautiful.
It's okay. So I had written the book. I thought, well, maybe one or two people would like to read it someday. Really, I did not.
Yeah.
And I sent it out. So I initially did what they tell you to do, which is I sent it to the agents. So I sent it to 10 agents. I heard back from 2.
It's great.
They requested pages. One said, I thought it would be more about the dog. And the other person said, I thought it would be a good book if it was about a pit bull, but Goldens are so loving that there's not really much of a story here.
Oh,
so I was like, well, this
is off grid. I can't.
I know.
Go ahead.
So I was I'm the very sensitive being, as we writers tend to be. And I was like, I hate this. I don't know if I'm going to do this. What am I going to do? And then one of my good friends had a friend who was, he lived in Minneapolis. He'd been working in editing and publishing his whole life. And he had a major anxiety episode where he was very, very sick. And in the depths of it, he decided, if I survive this, I'm going to do something to help people. So he started a mental health imprint that was like to publish books about mental health. And so he did like PTSD book. And she said, well, he's just this tiny little publisher in Minneapolis. And I could connect you guys. And I was like, okay, whatever, sure. And I talked to him on the phone. He was very nice,
Aw.
the way most Minnesotans are. Um, and I was like, oh, I don't know, maybe, yeah, sure. And then he kind of pursued me and said, I'll give you a couple grand as an advance and we can do this. And I was like, okay, sure, let's do it. And so it was just me and him. We hired a copy editor. We hired, I had all the control over the design. I had all the control over the editorial. We didn't have an editor. We just had the copy editor and the designer for the cover. And so as I was about to publish it, I got a call from an agent in New York. So a friend of mine from grad school had read the manuscript, and she, unbeknownst to me, had sent it to her agent, who was like a big agent in New York. The agent called me about 3 months before the book was going to be published, and she said, I could sell this to a big house. And I said, that's so amazing. You're about 7 months too late. And thank you, but no thank you. Because I was working with this guy every day. He would send me.
So you turned her down. Wow.
I turned her down. Yeah.
Wow.
Because we had plans and we had been working, and we were like best friends at this point. And he was doing this whole thing for me, and I was so into it. And I flew to AWP was in Minneapolis. So I flew to Minneapolis, and he did an event with me and musicians, and it was so cool. And I was like, I can't say, oh, sorry, the big wigs want me
I'm
now.
proud of you. That's not easy.
And it's also like, that wasn't what I had been envisioning. So we publish it. The little press, we publish it, and it sells out everywhere in a day. And I'm crying in my friend's bathroom, the one because I was in Seattle on my little self tour where I was driving with literally books in my car. And I was in her bathroom crying because I was like, because he had printed 2,000. He thought that was going to be plenty, and they were gone. And he was like, it's going to take 2 weeks to get them reprinted. And I was like, oh my God, like this is the worst. And anyway, so then we're on the tour. I'm in Portland now, and I'm at a radio show. I get a phone call from New York, and I'm like, I don't know what that is. And I called her, and she said, could you please call me? It's the same agent. She said, okay, so what would you say if I told you I have an offer from Penguin? And I was like, a what now? And so I talked with him. His name was Adam. And I talked to him, and I was like, maybe we should do this. And he would have to sell the rights back to me, which a lot of times with smaller presses, they're not willing to do it because you're their cash cow, right? And
Yeah.
he is an incredible human being, and bless his heart, he sold the rights back to me. And he also negotiated for a much bigger advance than I was gonna argue for. I was just like, thanks so much. That's great. That's more money than I thought I would ever make from writing. Great. And he's like, nope, we need a quarter, 25% more. And they were like, yeah, sure, no problem. And I was like, oh, okay, that's how you do that. Okay.
That's how you do it.
Yeah. And so I gave him, I think we split the advance in half. Actually, I think I gave him 2/3 of the advance, and then I kept a third, and then I got all royalties. So yeah,
That's very cool.
So then Penguin published it, and they sent me on a 14-city tour, and I got to experience the difference between a small press and a big press, which is vast.
Yeah, that's huge. Oh, what a great story.
He is we both really were, I felt like we were just making something beautiful together, and he was really the champion who helped me get it in the world, and who helped me believe in myself. Believe every day was saying, this is an amazing book. This is an amazing book. And
he's like, I can have a crush on him. I'm just saying. No, that's a very special story. You were like taken care of, and I think it was your little bunker up above. Yeah. We are out of time, sadly. I can't even believe it. Yeah, so fast. I planned this for 20. Julie, thanks for coming on our show, and we appreciate you so much. And the story is incredible. Everybody needs to read this. So
thank you so much.
Well, the Virgin Authors will be back on December 19th with a special Tuesday appearance with publishing powerhouse Brooke Warner. And then 2 days later on our third Thursday with J.J. Elliott, author of the fabulous new novel. There are no rules for this, which I don't have in reach, but
I do. It's supposedly really, and
Yeah,
I'm
just-
a
I
good
just
reader.
had it. How's that gonna go?
And Julie does some classes too. We wanted to quickly throw that.
oh, yes.
They're available on your website, you
Yeah,
said?
yeah. My website's byjuliebarton.com.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, and here's JJ's book.
Such a
JJ's
good
book.
novel. So
Yay.
good.
But thank you. You can watch the Virgin Authors live here on Facebook, on our website at virginauthors.com, and on our YouTube channel as well. Please follow all the links to the different individual websites or reach out to each of us on social media. And we're so thankful that Julie came on our show. And have a great
and
night.
Julie's gonna she'll put in the chat her website where you can find out about her classes.
Definitely.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Night.
Bye.
Good night.